Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
That we're here on traditional unceded Algonquin territory, and c'est meegwetch. Madame la Présidente, c'est un grand honneur de prendre la parole ce soir.
Madam Speaker, it's a great honor to speak tonight to C-11. Everyone knows that this is a bill that amends the Broadcasting Act and modernizes it as well. 30 years ago, we passed this bill, and it hasn't been modernized since. And we have seen a sea change in broadcasting, streaming, and so forth since that time. It has really revolutionized the world of television, cinema, and arts, especially with the impact on our creators, our actors, and also Quebecers and Indigenous peoples. This bill, as I said, is not perfect. There are problems with certain aspects of it, but I've decided to vote in favor of it. And I'd also like to thank my colleague, the member for Kitchener Centre, and we have made different decisions on this, but we agree on the problems with the bill and on the reasons why he's going to vote, why we're going to vote differently.
I want to start with a few things just to clarify what it isn't. Moments ago, a very talented new member of Parliament in this place, the Honourable Member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, spoke about wishing that we could put it in more concrete, entrenched form, that freedom of expression and freedom of speech is respected in this land, and every Canadian knows they have a right to those things. And I would say, with all respect to that member, we have that. We have that. We have the right of free speech and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and beyond that, the act which this act amends, it amends, but doesn't cancel, it doesn't repeal, it doesn't wipe out these words. The Broadcasting Act, for the last 30 years, has entrenched the right of Canadians to freedom of expression. Nothing in this modernization in C-11 changes in any way our rights to freedom of expression. This bill doesn't censor anything. It doesn't change what we can see and what we can't see, what we can hear and what we can't hear. It attempts to achieve greater protections for Canadians, and many different varieties of Canadians, against the powers of the new digital world. I'm going to focus a little bit of time on some of the specific examples. But before I talk about the good the bill does, let me say where I hope we will observe closely how the bill works and be more than prepared to take it up again within the next year or two, I would suspect, if we have the problems that we fear we may have with the failure to make sure that Canadians who are not in the government's intentions supposed to be caught by this bill and differentiate the impact of the act on those people from the impact on the large digital platforms, whether it's the Netflix or the Craves or the HBOs. We're not intending to capture users who place their content on YouTube. One of the differentiations that I found quite useful that I actually heard from Professor Michael Geist was there's a difference between a platform, a place where you can put things, and the word he uses that is curated versus one that is not curated. I wish the government had used that kind of language in C-11 because I think it clarifies things a great deal. In other words, instead of concentrating on who does what on a platform, differentiate between the systems, differentiate between the platforms. So if we were to say, look, there's this area where there's a conscious effort to promote certain content. It's a curated place versus one that everybody in their well, I won't say everybody their dog, because as far as I know, dogs can't yet do this, although my dog's awfully clever. But everybody can put stuff up, and it's not being curated to meet a certain purpose. If it's being curated to meet a certain purpose or to create different profits, then that would have I think, a bit of better differentiation than what we have in C-11. What we have in C-11 has left us divided. And the question, I don't disagree one bit with my colleague from Kitchener Centre, that this bill should be much better, clearer, on that question of platform versus user. Platforms in, users out is the government's intent. I believe it is, but the drafting does not make that sufficiently clear. And I think we'll have to go back to it and improve on this and clarify this. I'm concerned, I remain concerned that the CRTC has a lot of clout and power in this, and I hope that we see that the CRTC is guided by the best information from people who are skeptical about this bill to make sure its use does not do anything but improve the situation for Canadians, both those who enjoy being the product of creators and those who create. I hate to use the word consumption, like people who consume culture. I'm afraid I won't use that, but people who enjoy culture, people who are edified by culture, people who are ennobled by culture. Those of us who are essentially the audience need to benefit from this act just as the creators do. And the discussion around platforms versus users, I don't think the government's got it right yet. So why am I going to vote for this bill? I look at the creative community, and I think that there's no question about this. It's empirically documented that the rise of the digital broadcaster has reduced the economic status of Canadian musicians and Canadian creators versus those in the U.S. Just to give you one example from the world of music, that a traditional broadcaster generally sent 49 cents out of every dollar from Canadian music to the U.S. 49 cents out of every dollar. That sounds like a lot. But then look at the digital broadcaster. The digital broadcaster sends 64 cents to the U.S. out of every dollar. From 49 to 64. That's a big difference if you're living on those earnings. In fact, I don't know how Canadian musicians can live on earnings. In the last year, in 2021, on average, Canadian musicians writing their own material earned, wait for it, $67 total in royalties from digital streaming platforms. And this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable that somebody who's writing their own music in Canada has their income reduced just by virtue of what medium they use to share that material. We need to have a broadcasting act that promotes Canadian creators within Canada and overseas, and we hope this bill will improve things. Certainly, the Canadian Media Producers, the Coalition for Diversity for Cultural Expression, the Society of Composers, Authors and Music Publishers, SOCAN, and the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, Radio, otherwise ACTRA, are saying we need desperately for our own survival as artists to redress the imbalance that when it goes onto a digital platform, Canadians are paid less, valued less, and will turn from that career because you can't make ends meet. And as the rise of digital access to creativity, as digital overtakes traditional, the situation will only get worse. And that's the trend line we see, that the digital mediums of online sharing of everything in terms of music, film, video, TV, there's a huge creative class in Canada. As a matter of fact, just to give some context for it, the membership of the Society of Composers, Authors, and Music Producers is 175,000 people. And by the way, SOCAN doesn't just promote these brilliant creative people. It actually runs the system that collects the royalties and distributes them fairly. So when you're going outside of that system, you're seeing basically like sand through your fingers, the funds to pay musicians the royalties they deserve slip through your fingers without capturing it. And that's why SOCAN is so strongly in favor of C-11. The same is true of how people feel across the spectrum of other artistic endeavors. We've heard a lot in this place about films like The Handmaid's Tale, and it's hard to say you love The Handmaid's Tale when, as a feminist, you think, how does Margaret Atwood see the future coming before we do? And I dread the day I go into a shop with my debit card and it's taken from me. But it's not sufficiently Canadian content when the leads and the producers and the people holding the cameras and the people yelling, cut, are not Canadian. And that's what C-11 hopes to repair. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. When I listen to the member speak, I do think about the Canadian industry. And it seems to me that the Canadian industry will be further ahead by the passage of C-11 than if it's not passed. And I'm wondering if the member could give her a clear indication whether or not she appreciates that fact, or does she disagree with that fact?
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, I hope I was clear in my speech that that's the reason I'm voting for C-11. I think it's important and urgent that we pass C-11 now. We saw C-10, last Parliament's attempt to pass this. Of course, it's not the fault of any of us in the opposition that we had an unnecessary election which caused C-10 to die on the order paper. But Canadian performers and creators have been waiting a very long time to see a modernization that takes into account the way their income is undermined by online streaming. We need to do this urgently, and I hope go back, and if it turns out, as many have warned us, there's mistakes made in other parts of the bill, we go back and fix that later.
Questions et commentaires. L'Honourable.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Drummond. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands for her speech on Bill C-11. I was very happy to learn that she intends to vote in favour. I had a few concerns with regard to the Green Party when I heard our colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands side with the Conservatives with regard to digital content and Clause 4.2 in particular. So I was wondering if she shared that opinion, that is, that article may cause concern in terms of freedom of expression and the freedom of creation for these new artists who are becoming more and more present in our landscape, and they'll do us proud in future. I also have a question with regard to the Canadian content that she mentioned. She talked about the Handmaid's Tale, and she said that C-11 was going to remedy the fact that a production such as that one was not considered Canadian content. Now, what I want to understand is whether she thinks that content is going to become Canadian content, or whether the rules need to be tightened to ensure that what is produced with stories from here should also be produced with talents from here. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands. I will try and respond adequately to my colleague from Drummond, to both of his questions. First of all, I'm very comfortable with the position of my colleague from Kitchener Centre. In our party, the Green Party, we don't have to all toe the party line. There is no party line. We're green. But we have our own ideas, our own opinions, and we decide as members of Parliament what our position for our riding will be. But also, I think it is true that it's essential to have cultural products from here produced by Canadians and Quebecers. And I remember my colleagues' speeches, just like all the members of the Bloc, very strongly in favor of our artists from here, people who do cinema, TV, artists, singers. And Quebec culture is more threatened with this development of online content, and it needs to be protected.
Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Member, I wanted to ask her about the CRTC. We know that this C-11 does give sweeping new powers to the CRTC, and my question is that we have heard that the government is not willing to disclose the policy directive for the CRTC. And is that not concerning to the member that we're giving the CRTC these new powers without actually knowing what their mandate is going to be and what the policy directive will be?
The Honourable Member for Saanich, Gulf Islands.
Thanks, my honourable colleague from Kelowna Lake Country. Yes, I have a lot of concerns about the CRTC. I used to appear, by the way, as an administrative lawyer in front of the CRTC gazillion years ago on things like Bell Canada review of revenue requirements when we were breaking up Ma Bell. I was a lawyer with the Public Interest Advocacy Centre and was before the CRTC quite a lot. I think that that policy directive should be public. And I'll tell you, one of the things CRTC did in recent years, which I find very concerning, was deciding that Russia Today, or RT, was appropriate content and available to be packaged on cable channels. That never should have happened. So we need to keep a pressure up to say we need to see from the government the directive to the CRTC, and we need more transparency from the CRTC.
Resume